A millionaire walked into a classroom expecting just another day, but a little girl's simple drawing of her paralyzed mother shattered his heart. He promised to protect her, but when the truth about who she really was came out, everything changed forever. What secret did that little girl's drawing hide? Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from and what's the time there right now? The welfare school's auditorium overflowed with restless energy as sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting bright streaks across rows of eager children, their drawings taped proudly to the walls like fragile pieces of their imagination brought to life, while teachers whispered to each other about the importance of this day, because a very special guest had come to see them, a man whose name carried weight in the business world, but who today walked not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, but as someone curious about the unpolished innocence of young minds. Ethan Cole, dressed immaculately in a sky-blue tailored suit with a crisp tie that seemed almost out of place amid the humble wooden benches and faded stage curtains, yet his presence filled the space with awe, excitement, and nervous anticipation, the children pointing shyly toward their bright drawings of flowers that looked like suns, superheroes flying over rooftops, and houses that leaned sideways yet carried warmth, each child hoping this powerful man would pause by their paper and smile, maybe say a word that would echo in their hearts forever. And Ethan, instead of rushing through the rows, took his time, kneeling down to eye level, asking questions in a soft voice that made the poorest child feel rich in attention, and laughter rippled when he praised a crooked rainbow or a tree with pink leaves. Yet in the middle of all this playful noise, his polished shoes stopped before a sheet of paper taped lower than the rest, not bursting with color but drawn with trembling strokes, and his breath caught in his throat as his eyes settled on an image that instantly changed the atmosphere for him. A simple drawing of a woman seated in a wheelchair, her arms frail, her smile faint, her world confined to wheels that suggested immobility rather than freedom, and while Ethan stared with silence heavy as a storm about to be react, a wave of laughter rolled through the hall, cruel giggles bouncing off the walls, little fingers pointing not with admiration but mockery, for they did not understand the depth behind the sketch. And in the middle of that ridicule stood a 6-year-old girl with golden hair that shimmered like sunlight on water, and wide blue eyes that fought to hold back tears, her small frame straight yet shaking under the sound of those laughs, her hands clutching the edges of her dress as if holding herself together, her innocence colliding with the harshness of children who could not see the truth behind her art. And in that instant, Ethan Cole, a man accustomed to boardrooms, negotiations, and empires, felt the walls of the school close in on him, because he had expected to find joy, not pain, in a child's picture. Yet here it was before him, raw and heartbreaking, and he did not laugh, he did not join the chorus of cruelty, he froze, his heart pounding as if reminding him he was human before he was wealthy, his mind burning with one single question that refused to be silenced. Why would this child draw something so painful? What story hid behind those careful lines of a woman in a chair, instead of the fantastical worlds her classmates had imagined? What truth was too heavy for a girl so small to carry, and why did it feel, inexplicably, as if this picture was about to change not just the competition, not just the morning, but the entire course of his life? Ethan slowly bent down until his polished shoes were level with the tips of Lily's worn little sneakers, his tall frame lowering with surprising gentleness as his sharp, commanding eyes softened into something almost fatherly, the kind of gaze that belonged not to a man of skyscrapers and wealth but to someone suddenly stripped of titles and status, brought face to face with fragile innocence, and his voice, usually steady, when addressing thousands in boardrooms, came out low and careful, as though he feared even his tone could break her. "Sweetheart, who is this woman sitting in the wheelchair?" And in that charged instant, the hall full of restless noise froze, every whisper and giggle swallowed by silence, and Lily's trembling lips parted, her breath shaky, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her dress as her blue eyes flickered between her picture and this stranger's kind yet piercing stare. Then in a voice so small it seemed it might disappear before reaching anyone's ears, she whispered, "She is my mommy," and the air cracked with a heaviness no one expected. Laughter evaporating into guilt, tiny shoulders slumping as the students who had mocked moments earlier shifted uncomfortably, their eyes dropping to the floor tiles, ashamed of their cruelty, the teachers too exchanging guilty glances, realizing they had not stopped the ridicule quickly enough, but Ethan's focus never wavered, his chest tightening with a pang that ripped deeper than business stress ever had. For in that frail admission, he understood that this was not a child's fantasy or playful imagination drawn on paper, it was a piece of her truth spilled in color, and though he wanted to say something to soothe her, his throat closed with emotion he hadn't felt in years, his mind replaying the innocence of her trembling words, his hands instinctively reaching forward as though to shield her from the weight of so many eyes, and the silence of the auditorium grew thicker, heavy enough to make even the hum of the ceiling fans sound intrusive, while little Lily's body seemed both fragile and brave, as if she had carried this secret far too long, forcing herself to reveal it in the only way she knew how, through a drawing that made her vulnerable to ridicule yet impossible to ignore. And Ethan, though usually a man who measured every decision by logic and strategy, felt something unexplainable rising in him, a mix of sorrow and curiosity, a need to understand why such a young girl carried such grief, and as he glanced at her picture again, the rough lines of the wheelchair, the faint attempt at a smile on the mother's face, he knew in his heart that this moment was bigger than any competition, bigger than applause or trophies. It was a doorway into a story no one had dared to ask about until now, and the weight of it pressed on him so powerfully that he barely registered the shifting of the students in their seats, the shuffling of teachers in the corner, because in that moment, it was just him and Lily, one powerful man undone by the simple truth of a little girl who, without meaning to, had reminded him of the humanity that wealth could never replace. Ethan's hand, usually steady when signing contracts worth millions, trembled slightly as he rested it on Lily's small shoulder, the warmth of her fragile frame startling him with how little there was to hold, and though he wanted to keep his tone even, his voice cracked as he asked, almost fearing the answer, "And where is your daddy, little one?" And at once her lashes fluttered, heavy with unshed tears, her gaze tilting down as though the truth itself was too heavy to look at him directly, until those crystal blue eyes finally lifted, shimmering with grief far too old for a child of 6, and she whispered words that stabbed through the silence like knives. "My stepdad. He kicked us out when my mommy got paralyzed." And her small hands twisted together nervously as she continued, her voice breaking. "He said he can't pay for her treatment or our food. I haven't eaten for 3 days." And the words fell like stones in a well, echoing through the hall that only moments ago had been filled with laughter, now reduced to stunned stillness, the children who had teased her earlier staring in wide-eyed shock, some with lips quivering in shame, others hiding their faces in their palms, while the teachers shifted uneasily, wishing they could erase the hurt that had been unleashed. But nothing could soften the raw truth pouring from her fragile mouth, and Ethan felt heat rise to his face. Not anger at the child but sorrow so sharp. It nearly unmoored him, because here he stood in polished leather shoes and a suit worth more than the entire school's monthly budget, yet this small girl, thin as a reed, had not eaten in days, her voice trembling with hunger and heartbreak, and it struck him with cruel irony that his fortune, measured in stocks and skyscrapers, meant nothing in this moment compared to the simplest act of feeding her, compared to the comfort of telling her she was safe. And though his mind raced with disbelief, how could any man turn his back on such a child? How could he abandon a woman stricken by paralysis and a daughter too young to fend for herself? His heart knew the question was larger than logic. It was about cruelty, about selfishness, about the kind of absence that scars children forever, and as gasps rippled through the hall, he realized this story was not just her burden, it was now his, woven into him by the weight of her confession, and while the children fidgeted and the teachers whispered, Ethan's eyes burned with unshed tears, his jaw tight, his soul crushed by the contrast between his excess and her emptiness. And in that moment, the empire he had built, the wealth he had secured, the image he had perfected, all of it dimmed, meaningless against the hollow hunger of one little girl who looked at him with hope so fragile it might shatter if he failed her. And the unspoken question screamed in his mind with merciless force. Who could abandon such a fragile girl and her mother, and how could he ever let that continue a second longer? Ethan did not hesitate a second longer. He reached out and scooped Lily into his arms, her tiny frame pressing against the crisp fabric of his tailored suit, the scent of chalk and crayons clinging to her hair mixing with the faint cologne he wore. And though dozens of stunned eyes, teachers frozen in shock, students wide-eyed with disbelief, were locked on him, he ignored them all, holding her with a fierce protectiveness that startled even himself, and as her sobs broke against his chest, dampening the fine material he usually guarded so carefully, his voice thundered with conviction that cut through the silence of the hall. "No one will laugh at you again. I'm your daddy now. From today, I'll take care of you and your mommy." And the words, unplanned and raw, carried more weight than any speech he had ever given in corporate halls, and Lily clutched the lapels of his suit with desperate little hands, trembling as though afraid this promise was a dream that might dissolve if she let go, her tears soaking him, her voice quivering through the sobs. "Really? You won't leave us too?" And those words stabbed him like shards of glass because hidden inside them was the history of abandonment. The ache of being cast aside, the wounds left by someone who should have been her protector. And Ethan's throat tightened as his chin dipped toward her golden hair, his lips brushing the crown of her head as he whispered, voice cracked with emotion he could not contain. "Never, I promise you, my angel." And though the declaration rang with strength, deep inside him a storm churned, because the moment she leaned into him with such trust, he felt a strange unease wrap around his ribs. A nagging whisper he could not silence, as though some unseen truth hid just behind her eyes, as though this bond he had claimed in an instant was not entirely new, as though this fragile girl he cradled had threads tying her fate to his in ways he could not yet understand. And the longer he held her, the stronger the sensation grew, his heartbeat out of rhythm, his mind caught between the warmth of her small body and the haunting familiarity of her presence. For every sob that shuddered through her chest pressed deeper into his own soul, awakening a memory that refused to surface yet refused to leave, and as the room remained hushed, no one daring to interrupt this moment, Ethan glanced at the drawing again, the woman in the wheelchair, her faint smile etched in shaky crayon lines, and something inside him twisted violently, as though he had seen that face before, somewhere in a past he had buried. Somewhere in a story he had walked away from, and though he did not yet know why, the thought of meeting Lily's mother filled him not just with responsibility, but with dread, because this child felt too familiar, too close, too much like a part of him he had lost long ago, and he held her tighter, torn between the certainty of his promise and the gnawing fear that the truth waiting for him would either save him, or destroy everything he thought he knew about himself. True to the vow that had just torn from his lips, Ethan wasted no time. He carried Lily out of the school with an urgency that left the teachers stunned, his sleek car waiting at the curb as though destiny had parked it there, and he buckled her carefully into the back seat before instructing his driver in a tone that brooked no hesitation. "To the hospital. Fast." And the city blurred past the windows, neon lights and gray buildings streaking together as Ethan's mind raced faster than the vehicle, his arms stretched back protectively so Lily would feel he was near, and when they arrived, he strode through the hospital's sterile halls with the kind of authority that usually intimidated executives, but here it came from desperation rather than power. The child's hand wrapped tightly in his as though letting go might mean losing the one anchor she had just found, and within minutes a cluster of doctors in white coats gathered around, their voices calm but clinical as they explained the condition. Her mother had been paralyzed after a terrible accident, her legs refusing to respond, her body weakened by months of insufficient care, but with proper treatment, advanced therapy, and time, there was still hope for recovery. And while most men would have sked about costs or risks, Ethan didn't blink, didn't bargain, didn't calculate. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a pen, and signed a blank check with a flourish that stunned even the senior physician, his sharp signature sprawling across the paper like a promise, his voice low yet unwavering. "Whatever it takes, she gets it." And Lily's wide eyes lifted to him, her mouth parting in disbelief that someone could make her mother's healing a priority in seconds. But before relief could settle over them, Ethan asked the question that weighed heavier than money. "Where is she? I want to see her." And the room fell strangely tense, doctors exchanging uneasy glances until a nurse, older and seasoned, stepped forward, her tone careful, almost warning. "Sir, are you sure? This case is complicated." And her hesitation sent a shiver down Ethan's spine, though he masked it with the composure of a man who had faced hostile boardrooms, yet this felt different, personal, like she was shielding him from something more than medical facts. But his jaw tightened, his hand curling into a fist at his side before he steadied it again, and he met her cautious eyes with unwavering resolve, his voice dropping into the tone of absolute command. "Yes, take me to her." Because beneath the surface of his determination throbbed that gnawing unease he had felt earlier, the whisper of familiarity in Lily's presence, the sense that this meeting would not simply be about compassion, but about confronting a truth long buried. And as the nurse finally nodded, turning toward the ward with slow, deliberate steps, Ethan's pulse pounded like a drum, each stride carrying him closer to a room that might hold not only a paralyzed woman, but the answer to why his soul felt as if it already knew this child, why every heartbeat screamed that what he was about to see would alter his life forever. The nurse gently pushed the door open, her eyes flickering with concern. Ethan stepped into the room, his polished shoes echoing against the sterile hospital floor. The air smelled of antiseptic, but beneath it lingered something heavier: grief. His gaze traveled slowly to the figure on the bed. A woman, fragile as glass, lay still beneath thin white sheets. Her skin was pale, her lips colorless, yet her features were painfully familiar. Ethan's breath caught in his chest. "No, it can't be," he whispered, his voice breaking. The nurse quietly excused herself, leaving him to face the truth alone. His legs weakened, but he forced himself closer. The woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. When her tired eyes finally met his, time itself seemed to stop. "Emily!" Ethan choked, the name tumbling from his lips. Her lips parted in shock. Ethan?" she whispered, disbelief in her frail voice. Memories crashed through him like a storm: wedding vows, broken promises, bitter arguments, the day she walked away. He had buried it all under wealth and work. But here she was, broken, weak, and yet alive. Behind him, Lily's small hand slipped into his. Her voice trembled. "Mommy, do you know him?" Ethan's head spun. His throat burned as realization struck. This wasn't a stranger's child. This was his flesh and blood. His own daughter had been standing in front of him all along. He staggered back a step, hand pressing against his chest. His world, built on control and certainty, was collapsing. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Lily," she whispered weakly, he's your father." The room went silent except for the steady beeping of machines. Lily froze, staring between them. "Daddy?" Her voice cracked like fragile glass. Ethan's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Yes, sweetheart," he managed, voice trembling. I'm your daddy." Lily's tiny frame shook as tears streamed down her cheeks. She stumbled forward, clinging to his waist. You're really my daddy," she cried. Ethan sank to his knees, holding her tightly, his own tears spilling. Emily watched. Her expression torn between relief and sorrow. She raised a trembling hand to her lips, stifling a sob. The man she once loved, the father of her child, was finally facing the truth. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan whispered hoarsely, looking up at Emily. Her eyes filled with pain. "You were so cold back then, Ethan. I tried, but you wouldn't listen." He flinched at the memory of his arrogance, his pride. He remembered the harsh words, the slammed doors. He had driven her away, and in doing so, he had abandoned his own child without knowing it. His chest heaved, guilt clawing at him. "Emily, I swear, I didn't know." She nodded faintly. "I believe you." Lily's sobs softened as she pressed her face into his chest. Ethan stroked her golden hair, whispering, "I'll never let you go again." Emily's voice broke. She has waited her whole life for this moment. His heart clenched tighter. How many birthdays had he missed? How many nights had she cried herself to sleep without him? The thought crushed him. He wanted to scream, to turn back time, but all he could do now was hold on to the child who had unknowingly drawn him back to his past. Ethan rose slowly, still cradling Lily in his arms. He approached Emily's bed, his eyes locked on hers. I'll take care of you both, he said with conviction. Emily blinked in disbelief. After everything, why? Because it's what I should have done years ago, he confessed. Because you're the mother of my child, and because I never truly stopped caring. Emily's lips trembled, torn between forgiveness and fear. Her eyes brimmed with unspoken emotions. Lily glanced up at her mother, whispering, "Mommy, can Daddy stay with us now?" Emily looked at her daughter's pleading face, then back at Ethan. Silence thickened the room. Finally, Emily nodded slowly. For Lily's sake, yes. Ethan exhaled, relief flooding him. He pulled a siu, hair close to Emily's bed, and sat down. For a moment, none of them spoke. The weight of years of separation pressed heavy in the air. Lily curled up in his lap, her small hand gripping his shirt. Tightly, he brushed his lips against her forehead, whispering, "My angel." Emily watched the tenderness, tears streaming silently. She had dreamed of this reunion for so long, yet feared it would never come. Ethan finally broke the silence. "Emily, what happened to you? How did things get this bad?" She closed her eyes, gathering the strength to answer. "After you left, I tried to build a life. But fate wasn't kind." She spoke of the accident, the cruel stepfather, the endless struggles. Every word pierced Ethan's soul like a blade. His jaw clenched, rage boiling beneath his sorrow. How dare anyone hurt them? How dare he himself abandon them, even unknowingly? He reached out, gently holding Emily's frail hand. "You're not alone anymore," he vowed. "I'll fight for you. I'll fight for both of you." Emily's lips quivered, the faintest smile breaking through her tears. "You sound different, Ethan. Softer." "Because I've lost too much already," he admitted. Lily looked up, her blue eyes shining with hope. "Daddy, will you really stay forever?" Ethan hugged her tightly. "Forever, my love, I promise." He pressed his forehead against hers, sealing the vow with his tears. Emily whispered, "She's waited years to hear those words." Ethan's throat tightened. He had been blind, but fate had given him a second chance, and he would not waste it. He turned back to Emily, determination in his eyes. "We'll start her treatments immediately. You'll walk again, Emily. I'll make sure of it." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You haven't changed. You're still making impossible promises." "Then watch me keep this one," he replied firmly. The machines beeped steadily, almost as if echoing his resolve. Emily's eyes softened with the first flicker of trust. Lily nestled between them, her small body radiating peace. For the first time in years, she felt like she truly belonged. Ed and Ethan placed a hand over both of theirs, binding them together. "This family was broken once," he said softly, "but I won't let it break again." Emily's tears flowed freely, her heart silently whispering the forgiveness she wasn't yet ready to speak aloud. Lily giggled through her tears. "We're together now." Ethan kissed her forehead again. "Yes, Angel, together forever." And though the past still lingered, a fragile hope began to bloom within them all. Emily's eyes widened, her frail body trembling as though even the weight of recognition was too much to bear, her voice cracking with disbelief as she whispered, "Ethan, what are you doing here?" And Lily, still clutching her father's hand moments before, broke free and rushed to the bedside with innocent eagerness, her golden hair bouncing as she clung to her mother's arm, declaring with the simple purity only a child possessed, "Mommy, this man says he's my daddy now." And the words rang like a bell in the sterile room, echoing against the walls, slicing through the silence with a mixture of joy and unbearable tension, while Ethan staggered closer, his knees weakening under the gravity of what he had discovered, his eyes clouded with tears he could no longer hold back, his heart clenching in his chest as he looked at Emily, not just as the mother of his child, but as the woman he once promised eternity to, and now realized how mercilessly he had failed her, his lips trembling as he asked with a desperate voice, "Emily, why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide her from me all these years?" And her composure crumbled, her hands covering her face as sobs tore through her fragile frame, each tear speaking louder than words as she finally gasped through her pain. "Because you left me when I needed you most, Ethan. Because the day you turned your back, the day you walked away, I lost not only a husband, but the only person I thought would stand by me forever, and I couldn't bear to face you again, not with the shame, not with the loneliness, not with the scars you left behind. And her voice broke like Chatteray glass, raw and unfiltered, her sobs filling the room with the sound of years of bottled agony, while Ethan stood motionless, his chest heavy with regret so suffocating it was hard to breathe, his memories colliding with the present, remembering her laughter, her devotion, her soft pleas for him to listen that he had ignored in his pride, until he saw her turn away that final day, unaware that she carried within her the life they had created together. And now the truth struck him like a cruel blow, that in abandoning her, he had also abandoned his daughter, and he fell to his knees beside the bed, clutching the frame as tears coursed down his face, whispering hoarsely, "Emily, I was blind, I was arrogant, I thought I was protecting myself, but all I did was destroy us. I destroyed you, I destroyed her childhood, I destroyed the love that was the purest thing I ever had." And Emily, though her body was weak, could not contain the anger and sorrow mingled in her chest as she turned her face away, muttering, "Do you know how many nights I cried alone, Ethan? Do you know how many times I prayed you'd walk through the door? Do you know how many birthdays she spent blowing out candles with no father beside her?" And each accusation cut into him deeper than any insult ever could, for these were truths carved out of pain, truths he could never erase, and yet as he listened, his heart begged for forgiveness, his voice pleading, "If I could turn back time, I would, Emily, I swear I would. But I can't undo the past. All I can do is beg you to let me make it right, to let me give you and Lily the love I should have given from the very beginning." And Lily, standing between them, glanced up with wide, tearful eyes, torn between her mother's grief and her father's remorse, whispering softly, "Mommy, please, don't cry. Daddy is here now," her little hands clutching Emily's blanket as if her touch could hold their fragile family together. And Emily's sobs softened as she looked at her daughter's innocent face, realizing how much Lily longed for wholeness, and though her own wounds bled afresh, she could not deny the bond forming before her, and she turned back to Ethan, her eyes swollen with tears, her voice trembling as she said, "I don't know if I can forgive you, Ethan. Not yet. But for her sake I can't push you away." And his heart shattered anew, because though the road to redemption would be long, there was still a chance, a fragile, flickering chance, and he reached for Emily's hand, his touch hesitant, reverent, whispering with raw sincerity, "Then let me prove myself, day by day, moment by moment, let me carry the burden I left you with, let me earn the right to stand by your side again." And in that moment, with the sound of his daughter's soft sobs filling the sterile air, Ethan Cole, the man who once thought money could buy him peace, was stripped bare of every layer of pride and power, left only with the aching truth that he had lost everything that mattered, and now, by some miracle of fate, was being given one final chance to make it right, though the weight of his regret threatened to crush him before he could even begin. Ethan lowered himself slowly until his knees touched the cold hospital floor, his chest tightening as he reached for Emily's frail hand resting limply on the armrest of her wheelchair, his thumb brushing over the fragile bones of her fingers as though trying to pour all his strength into her weakness, his voice raw and stripped of pride as he whispered, "I failed you once, Emily. I left when I should have stayed. I turned my back when love begged me to hold on, but I swear before heaven itself, I will not fail you again. Let me mend what I shattered. Let me stand as the husband you deserved. Let me embrace the daughter I never knew. Let me finally become the family that both of you have longed for." And Emily's lips trembled as her eyes welled with tears she had tried so long to suppress, her body fragile yet, her heart overwhelmed, while Lily, unable to contain the tidal wave of emotion, threw her small arms around them both, her innocent voice ringing like the purest melody, "For the first time in my life, I have a daddy, and for the first time, Mommy isn't alone." And the simple truth of her words shattered whatever barriers still stood between them, pulling Ethan closer into the embrace until he felt the warmth of his daughter's hair against his cheek and the fragile tremor of Emily's breath against his shoulder, and he pressed a kiss on Lily's forehead, tears spilling freely down his face as he whispered against her golden hair, "You are my miracle angel, my greatest gift." And for the first time in years, the sterile hospital room felt alive with hope, the silence broken not by sobs of despair, but by the trembling sighs of a family rediscovering itself. And as Ethan held them tighter, he realized that all the towers he had built, all the empires he had controlled, All the wealth he had gathered meant nothing compared to the fragile weight of his daughter's arms around his neck. Nothing compared to the forgiveness slowly flickering in Emily's eyes, and when they finally rolled Emily's wheelchair toward the hospital doors, Ethan on one side and Lily skipping on the other, his hands firmly grasping both of theirs, the world outside seemed to pause, nurses in the hallway staring not at a CEO but at a man reborn, a man who had traded arrogance for humility, fortune for love, loneliness for belonging, and as the doors opened and sunlight streamed in, Ethan drew in a deep breath, feeling as though he had been given a second chance at life itself, and he whispered softly but with a conviction that echoed through every beat of his heart, "From this day forward, you are my everything, my reason, my home." And Emily, though weak, managed the faintest smile, her tears glistening, as she murmured, "Then maybe this really is a new beginning." And Lily, laughing through her tears, squeezed both their hands and declared with the wisdom only a child could carry, "We don't need to be rich to be happy, we just need each other." And Ethan, the man once worshipped for his fortune, finally understood that true riches were measured not in numbers, but in the moments he almost lost forever. And as they stepped into the light together, the world seemed to see more than a wealthy man with his family. It saw the living proof that kindness, love, and humanity shine brighter than gold, and for Ethan Cole, that truth was no longer just a lesson, but the legacy he vowed to live for the rest of his days.